second.
Because I've got...
Good evening. Wow, what an inauspicious way to begin a new year. Maybe that's the reason why I sound like I do. A little bit too much of Happy New Year, if you're saying. I hope you folks had a wonderful Christmas, nice Kwanzaa, nice Happy New Year, rockin' Ramadan, the whole 9 yards. The page has now been turned, and we've dived off the cliff. I think we've stopped that. Did we prevent the cliff? Or I'm not even sure what the deal is.
Hard to tell.
Hard to tell. But last night, today is January 2nd when we're actually filming this. Last night, I guess the House went for it big time. And some did, yeah. We'll see where it all shakes out in the next few weeks. But at any rate, onward and upward. This is a new year. It's another interesting show, we believe, for you. We've got a tremendous guest tonight, a great way to start the new year. And I'd like my partner in crime, Mr. Williamson, to introduce our guest. First of all, Happy New Year to you, big guy.
Same to you.
How was it getting back to the frozen Northeast?
Colder than I would have liked.
The witches, yeah. Whatever. Okay.
So as Ron says, tonight we have a real treat for everyone, and especially in light of what's been going on recently with the fiscal cliff and other things in Washington, D.C. Gentleman by the name of Tim Roesch, who some of us know as quite an expert on the Constitution and all the things that surround it. Tim was a school teacher for a number of years, and both in Massachusetts and I believe qualified in 2 other states, in California and Wyoming. He has since left the teaching profession to go into full-time tutoring, and he also does counseling. So I've personally heard Tim on 2 other occasions, and he's got a lot of very interesting information on the Constitution, and quite frankly, he's as expert as anyone that I have heard speak on the topic. So it's really going to be interesting for the folks to hear what Tim has to say. And without further ado,
we'll kick it off. One thing I suggest that folks do, if they'd like to, because of the quality of information that Tim will be presenting, you might want to take some notes as you listen to this, because there's an awful lot of interesting information here that's relevant to everybody watching this show. So without further ado, Tim, great having you.
Thank you, and Happy New Year.
It's our pleasure to have you here, believe me. Glad you braved the wilds of Worcester.
Oh, I came to Massachusetts. I like the weather. I like there to be cold in the winter and warm in the summer.
Well, you're certainly getting your wish.
I'd like to begin,
please,
talk with the Constitution. To get people to understand, the Constitution was not written for lawyers to discuss in smoke-filled rooms somewhere in the back of a courthouse. Mm-hmm. It was really meant to be discussed around the kitchen table, around the family table, in the taverns and the village greens. It was not meant to be a very difficult document, and it was certainly not meant to be something that had to be dissected. It was supposed to be very blunt, in your face, written in the language of the time for anybody with a moderate education to be able to understand. Certainly, if they couldn't read, somebody could read it to them. Mm-hmm. So for somebody to say they're a constitutional expert is sort of like saying you're an expert at watering your lawn. Granted, you might want to know what a lawn is and understand watering. Mm-hmm. Was the water coming out? Is it too cold? But in general, it was really meant to be common sense. And of course, there was a group of pamphlets by that name, mm-hmm. If anybody remembers. And
Thomas Paine?
It was something like that. It depends on what education level you were allowed to have in the local public school. So before I talk about that, I wanted to make that clear. No one should feel offended or scared about the Constitution. Go out and read it. I've been asked, where can you go to get information? Google U.S. Constitution. There's a federal website that has it, Heritage Foundation, everywhere. You can find a copy of the U.S. Constitution.
Apps for your smartphone?
I'm sure I don't have a smartphone, so I don't like anything in my pocket that's smarter than I am. But you get a copy of the Constitution and read it.
But isn't it a great big voluminous thing like Obamacare, 2,700 pages?
No, the copy I have, I mean, it's a shameless plug, and I've read, by the way, I was part of the Tea Party in New Hampshire where we read it for 24 hours. We started at page 1, and we just took turns, tag teaming, reading it. And the U.S. Constitution is far more simple a document than the first 10 pages of the Obama health care plan. So you shouldn't be afraid. It's not filled like a document for a mortgage or something with heretofores and hereafters and it's a very simple document. Like I said, it was meant to be given to the people. It wasn't meant to be sort of hidden from them in the back rooms. It was meant for people to read. And I'm going to start by trying to describe who the Americans were, because sometimes we forget who came here and started America. We hear things on the news, oh, it was a bunch of wealthy white people that owned slaves. There were quite a few freed slaves living in, they wouldn't be slaves anymore, they'd be free men living in the colonies. And we'll talk a little bit about slavery as an issue. America certainly was not the be-all and end-all of slavery by any means whatsoever. But the big thing is people shouldn't be afraid of reading the U.S. Constitution. You should get a copy of it. You got a copy of it here. Michael Haller writes an excellent version where on the facing side you have the original wording and then a more modern wording that makes things a little bit more clear so you can see for yourself how it's written.
And then, I'm sorry, the name of the author again
is Michael Haller, H-O-L-L-E-R, and it's The Constitution Made Easy. And as you can see, it's a smaller document, even double. I mean, this is obviously the document twice. It's quite small and easy to read, and you won't require 10 lawyers and a lot of coffee to be able to read it. There are a great many misconceptions about the U.S. Constitution, most of them because they're based upon fallacies themselves. We were just talking about the editorial in the New York Times where essentially it was suggested we should get rid of the U.S. Constitution.
This was yesterday, the editorial page?
I believe it was yesterday.
The Times, yep.
I've got a copy of it. I don't want to be reading it in front of the camera. But I'll paraphrase. And essentially he said he was a constitutional scholar. Right there, if somebody says they're a constitutional scholar, the first thing that should enter in your mind is, oh, really? What do you mean by that? It'd be like me saying I'm a scholar at drinking coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. Well, where did you get your degree? You know, the Constitution isn't meant to be a document that scholars fight over and argue over. It's supposed to be very blunt, very simply written. So I'm always suspicious when I hear somebody say, oh, I'm a constitutional scholar.
To paraphrase that, we have an individual in the White House who, unless I'm incorrect, was presented to us as a constitutional scholar.
Well, worse, he was presented as a professor. And of course, he wasn't a college professor. But that's Details. Barack Obama. Obviously comes after the formation of the Constitution. Though, since I was dragged a little bit off topic, if one Googles him as a state senator, there is a radio program where he mentions the U.S. Constitution and how he felt that it was a document that needed some change and needed some working because it wasn't good enough. Well, the government should be told what they can do for the people, not just what they can't do. And when he said that, the antenna of any American should go up, because this is the basic document that defines the federal government. The federal government is defined here. And I'm going to say something, I'm going to say it again, I'll say it here. The U.S. Constitution gives you no rights. You don't have, if you say, I have my constitutional rights, that means you misapprehend the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution presumes you already have rights. And it's a document used to define the powers within strict, narrow confines of the federal government. And this is something that most people go, huh, what? And they're going to flip through the Constitution and look for that, and we'll discuss that. The Constitution was designed to limit government, not people. So when somebody says, well, the Constitution really give you the right to bear arms. No, the Constitution is telling the federal government you can't prevent people from bearing arms just because they frighten you or something. We're going to get more into that later, but that's an important point to understand.
And I love it. Where you started, and of course we digressed or progressed, whatever you want to call it, about what does it really mean to be an American and the genesis of this country, the people coming over. We chatted a little bit about this off camera. Why don't we start right there?
Okay. Two events probably are the most important for defining what Americans are, and that would be Martin Luther and his hammering of his edicts on the wall or the door of the church, and the press, the printing press. These two events, and people say, huh, what? Write this down, look into it. The Protestant Reformation broke up the power of the Catholic Church. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about an individual's relationship with God. I'm referring to the bureaucracy. Because that's what Martin Luther was mad about. He was mad about bishoprics being sold to the highest bidder. It had nothing to do with your relationship with God. It was how much money you had. And that's what was upsetting him to some extent. There were other things as well that were bothering him. But it was the bureaucracy. So when I'm talking about the church, don't blend that in with a belief in God. I'm talking about the bureaucracy of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was in control, and they wanted to be in control. And in many parts of the world, it was a theocracy. And if you had any problem with the Catholic Church, you were in trouble. And, of course, the whole witch burning thing, mostly people weren't burned because of witchcraft. They were burned because you made the Catholic Church mad at you somehow, and it was easy to accuse you of witchcraft, burn you, and then take your stuff, and then give it out to people. And it was that sort of thing that really started to break apart groups from the Catholic Church. And again, I'm talking about the bureaucracy.
The institution itself.
The institution. People wanted to pray their own way. They wanted to sing their own hymns. They had problems. And the Catholic Church, as a bureaucracy, didn't like this. And that caused a great deal of struggle and schism in the Catholic Church. So the first thing to understand about what it means to be an American is most Americans were fleeing Europe or leaving Europe so they could believe in God the way they wished. We were a colony of England, but most of England's other colonies, people went there to make money. Or they went there because they were criminals, as in Australia, and were forced to go there. Yep. Americans went to America mostly to get away from religious persecution. Paul Revere was a Huguenot, was a French Huguenot. The Huguenots were treated in France in much the same way the Jews were treated all over Europe. They were burned, massacred. The St. Bartholomew Day's massacre was a good example. There were just hideous things done to them, and they fled. You had the Mennonites, what modern-day Amish would be called, and of course the Jews. Of course, most of the Jews in the New World went to Brazil because they were the converseros from Portugal. First Jewish synagogue was in Recife, for instance, and then Rhode Island. So that's the first thing to understand. Americans wanted to be left alone. Americans wanted to do their own thing when it came to spirituality. And the next and most important thing is technologically. The printing press opened up the whole concept of disseminating literature, information to people. So you had this now pull against the entrenched guilds, the professional institutions that would say, okay, you're a carpenter, and your children are going to be carpenters. And if you don't like it, tough. That's just the way it is. And if you wanted to switch and become a printer, or if you wanted to do you want to be a printer and a carpenter, you were in trouble. The New World offered opportunities. And as I was mentioning, one of the things off camera, one of the things in the movie Patriot, Mel Gibson in the movie is trying to make rocking chairs. Whether they did that on purpose or it was just an aberration, that actually was a perfect example of what an American was. Americans didn't want to just be called a cooper because they made barrels, or a parker because they maintained the grounds for some duke or duchess or whatever. They wanted to try stuff, experiment. And that's what he's doing in the movie. He's trying to make furniture. He's not doing a very good job of it, but it doesn't stop him. He feels he has the right to do that. And of course, if this was England, there would be guilds and trade unions going, hey, you can't be making furniture. That's somebody else's job. So that's another important thing to understand. Americans, the people who came to America were independent-minded. They wanted to try stuff, do new things, think outside the box. And so those two things are very important, the religious aspect and the technological. Technology goes even further. This was the New World. India had already had a huge civilization there. So there wasn't a lot of new stuff to discover. America was totally wilderness. I'll leave the whole idea of the Indians off to the side for the moment. My father's mother was a Mohawk Indian, and I can hear her voice in the back of my head screaming at me. But I'm going to leave how the Indians were involved in this to the side, because that's a separate issue you can discuss for hours. But when the settlers from Europe came here, to them, the place was empty. Sadly, because all the Indians, most of them had died. The Native Americans had died from the diseases. So they saw the promised land. God had opened it up to them. So when you came here, you had to know what you were doing. You couldn't fake it. You couldn't work 10% and let somebody else carry the weight for you. As the original pilgrims, the Mayflower Compact, realized, you come here and try to play the games people played in Europe, you were going to die of starvation. It wouldn't have happened in Europe. There's food could be brought in, things could be done. You're on your own in the New World. So if you said you knew how to do something and you didn't, you're in trouble, more ways than one. So that's another thing. Americans came here and had to build for themselves. There wasn't stuff already there. So they learned to be more independent. They learned to feel successful. They built ships by themselves. They built sawmills. They built foundries. They built these things from nothing. There wasn't something already there. There wasn't a group of people that could come and help them. They were on their own. So Americans also were used to the idea of being on their own. It wasn't a big deal to be cut off from the mother country, England. So if you want to understand what Americans are or were, you need to understand that. Another important thing that I learned while researching this is a book called Principia, which is very esoteric, written by Sir Isaac Newton. And essentially what he did in the 1600s is he discovered the natural laws that govern the movement of bodies in the heavens. This book became a bestseller for its time. People would read it to groups. It was even considered good literature for women. So women would gather together because you could teach somebody, this is why the moon rises where it does, when it does, and this is why it moves through the sky at this speed. A lot of people say natural law meant Thomas Jefferson believed in the trees and he was a tree hugger and he prayed to bushes. No, natural law, or what some people have mistaken for sort of Gaia worship, wasn't that. It was believed that God created laws that governed how the universe worked. And as a good believer in God, without people in between you and God, it was up to you to figure those out so you could operate within those laws, within those natural laws. Because if you veered from them, that's when bad stuff happened to you. So that's another important piece in this puzzle of what caused our founding fathers to write the document, was the idea there has to be, if there's a natural way objects move in the heavens, and Principia was a document that was read in this country, again, goes against the idea that Americans were sort of illiterate savages running around. No, reading and books were very important. It wasn't the lower classes that came to this country in large amounts. It wasn't criminals being sent into the Aborigines in Australia. These were mostly middle class where reading was important. You had to read to be able to read the Bible. Now, in the Catholic Church, the priest read the Bible to you. You weren't encouraged to read it, at least then. The Protestants, everybody had a chance to stand up in front of the congregation to read. So knowing how to read was important. And you weren't just going to read the Bible, you read anything else that showed up. And so you had multiple newspapers, pamphlets, books. These were all very important. So people were literate. And people were looking for the natural laws in things. What are the natural laws that guide navigation? Instead of just saying, I'm going to navigate the way my father did it or the way the captain taught me, the navigators coming from America were like, well, let's try it. Let's try to find out what the laws are, which is why our small Navy kicked the world's best Navy pretty much in its butt eventually at some point, because we weren't doing things by rote. We were doing things by natural law. And this becomes important when you try to understand where the Constitution came from. The Founding Fathers believed there was a natural law that governed how men were governed. And it was when you veered off that, that's when you got horrendous problems. You had tyranny, you had death and destruction. It's when you veered away. So they were trying to find the natural way that human beings could be governed. So again, that shows that this document wasn't just written quickly on well, it wouldn't have been a napkin, it would have been a towel or something in a bar. This was something that they'd given a great deal of thought for. And these were thoughtful men. These were not just somebody hanging out in an alley somewhere. Oh, let's do this, let's do that. So I'm hoping that people will look into this and read about the history of the 1600s and the early 1700s to understand the sort of people that were here. They were very independent. They were not factional. In other words, you want to have your church and pray your way, you do it over there, and I'm going to do it over here, and you stay. It's like that lake in Webster. You fish on your side, I fish on my side, no fish in the middle. So there wasn't this anger and hostility that would cause death and destruction. It was like, okay, you pray I'm going to pray my way. We evolved from the Salem witch trials. And in fact, the Salem witch trials were probably ended much faster because of American rationalism. Somebody finally said, wait a minute, this is stupid, instead of letting it go on for generations like it did in the continent. So we were independent-minded, very religious. I don't think there were any atheists obviously Mormonism wasn't discovered until much later. So it was mostly a Protestant religion, religious-based. There were Catholics. One of the events that happened here in Massachusetts was the Barnstable compulsory education riots, where the Catholics didn't want their children being sent to Protestant public schools. National Guard was called out, but that's another story altogether. So religious, independent-minded, and willing to try stuff, what works, because we're out here in the wilderness. We can't have stuff that looks like it works, or, well, the king says it's going to work. It has to work. It has to be effective. And those were the sort of people we were when we came here. So we wouldn't have accepted sort of mamby-pamby, strange, flinging bee pollen constitution. The people that lived here would have been very much in the idea of common sense. Does this make sense? And they would have been very suspicious of a 2,000-page document, not to mention the fact it would be highly expensive considering the cost of paper. So that brings us up probably right about to the 1760s.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The Revolutionary War and so forth. And
well, even before the Revolutionary War, it's important to understand that even in the 1760s, most Americans saw themselves as English citizens. The whole idea of breaking away from England wasn't something that fulminated from the 1720s on. Up until the French-Canadian War, French-Indian War, Americans saw themselves as English. They were English citizens who happened to be in a colony outside of England. Then the French-Indian War happened, and at the same time, a lot of the power was taken away from the king and given to a parliament. And the parliament is mostly responsible. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it's not so much the king they're mad at. They're mad at the parliament for passing all these taxes on them. And what were the taxes passed to do? To pay for the war. The parliament decided, you're not English citizens. What you are is cash cows. And your job is to give us money so we can pay our debts. And that is when things changed in the colonies. That's when the colonists are like, wait a minute, hold it. I've been under the assumption, this is the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This is a commonwealth. There's a document, a contract between the king and our government here. We're English citizens. We're not criminals shipped away or something. And to be treated that way, I think, was very demeaning. And it also slapped their face. It essentially told them, you're stupid. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know why you're here. Just be quiet and do what we tell you. Well, that sort of behavior gets you killed in the frontier. You need to support each other. You need to help each other. You need to work together, but you also need to have your own individual strengths, which you can give to the group. So right around the 1760s is when the Revolutionary War starts. That's when people started to say, wait a minute, we're English citizens. And England, the Parliament was essentially saying, no, you're not. You're slaves that we're allowing you. We're allowing you Boston. What do you mean allow? We built Boston. You know, and we get to the whole Elizabeth Warren thing. But, you know, we built this. Not we all together built this. It wasn't one, when the government didn't build it, we built it. And to be told, no, you didn't, it's ours, was really a kick in the teeth to the American attitude. And so we have the Tea Party, of course, dumping the tea in the Boston Harbor, which I think now would be considered, and EPA would probably have some problem with that. I'm going to sort of skip over the American Revolutionary War, because it's important. It's obviously, if it didn't succeed, we wouldn't be probably talking here today. We're certainly not about the U.S. Constitution. But essentially what it was a rebellion against the control of an outside power that had just shown its hand. It showed, we're in charge of you. All you need to do is shut up, sit down, and hold on, and we'll take care of the rest. And that's not what Americans were. Americans were not, okay, you're the king, it's all yours, which bumps us to now, when you start hearing people saying, "Oh, you didn't build that. Oh, you don't have the right to be mad at the government. The government can be mad at you if they want." And I think that same anger is there both places.
You know what's interesting? Something that I heard, I can't verify it. Maybe you can. Supposedly, a big catalyst in the revolution, in addition to the factors you talked about, is that the colonists were paying a tax of 3% to England. Think about what was just ratified. 13 times that amount. And I don't see people dumping anything into the Boston Harbor other than the usual stuff.
I've sort of split this talk up into two pieces. I'm going to get into where we are now and why I think why people are having problems now. But I think getting into the Revolutionary War and sort of skipping over it, not because it's not important,
understood,
because it's a different topic altogether. But I just felt we needed to get to that point.
Yeah. We started the show with, among other things, my making a statement that I thought people should be taking some notes based on what they'd be hearing during the show itself. We're kind of winding up. We've got about 30 seconds to go with this segment. Can you tell the people what they should be looking at as far as reference material, or what they should do at this point?
Read the U.S. Constitution. Start from there.
Pretty
that should
simple.
Be it's very simple. Start there and work outwards, both directions, earlier and later from there.
And watch the next show.
And watch the next show. That's right. That's right. Great having you. We look forward to having you on again and picking it up from where we're leaving it off. That's great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.